Ladies and gentlemen, kindly allow us to introduce to you our chief guest. Shri Amitab Kant, currently CEO NITI Ayog. He was till recently Secretary Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion. He is a member of the Indian Administrative Service. He is the author of Branding India, an incredible story. He has been a keen driver of Make in India, Startup India, Incredible India and God's Own Country campaigns which positioned and branded India and Kerala state as leading tourism destination. These campaigns have won several international awards and embraced a host of activities like infrastructure development, product enhancement, private-public partnership and positioning. He has worked as Chairman and CEO Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corporation, CMD ITDC, Joint Secretary Ministry of Tourism Government of India, Secretary Tourism Government of Kerala, Managing Director Kerala State Industrial Development Corporation, District Collector Kozhikode and Managing Director Metsafed. May I now invite Shri Amitab Kant to deliver the valedictory address.
Admiral Dhawan, the Executive Director of NMF, Captain Khurana, Admiral Nair, who's the founder of the National Maritime Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege and an honor to be in the midst of all of you. I'm particularly delighted because 2 days of conference with such a packed hall, animated discussion, and a lot of very vibrant subjects of discussion really demonstrates the unique interest in the blue economy. I'm particularly delighted that Admiral Dhawan, who's demonstrated, he's taken such remarkable leadership in driving this conference forward on the blue economy. I'd actually invited him to speak at NITI Ayog sometime back on the blue economy. And it was really fascinating to hear him because we are in NITI Ayog drawing up a vision. Instead of the 5-year plan, Prime Minister said that we should have a long-term vision of the country looking at 2030. We should have a strategy document for 7 years and an action plan for 3 years. So we were trying to look at how blue economy can really make India grow, and it was very fascinating to listen to Admiral Dhawan when he spoke there. So I'm particularly delighted that I'm in the midst of all of you at this the National Maritime Foundation. I was particularly delighted to learn that it was started by Admiral Nair in 2005 as a premier think tank on issues of maritime security, maritime cooperation, India's maritime heritage, and now it has taken the lead role in blue economy. I was also particularly delighted to see the National Maritime Journal, which was sent to me, and it had some very fascinating articles. So I think that this foundation has been in the forefront of academic research and has done several unique conferences, and therefore it's a great pleasure to be here. I think the era of blue economy is upon us, and the challenge for India really is that we are growing at about 7.6%. We are in oasis of growth in the midst of a very barren economic landscape across the world. But the challenge for India is really to grow at higher rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, year after year, for 3 decades or more, to be able to lift a very young population above the poverty line. We are passing through a window of demographic transition which rarely happens in history. 72% of our population is below the age of 32. And to my mind, this is one of the biggest social and economic transition that is taking place across the world. And the population in the European part of the world is getting older and older, and the population in India is getting younger and younger, and will keep getting young till 2040. And rarely in the history of the world, when you pass through such light dependency burdens, that countries have not created wealth. So I think we need to look at the concept of blue economy in the concept of our ability to make India grow, create jobs and prosper, and in the concept of our commitment towards sustainability. You know, when the Western world grew, and when it grew rapidly, it grew on the back of urbanization. Cities today actually account for just 3% of the Earth's land mass, but they generate almost 80% of the global GDP. They are centers of innovation, they are centers of creativity, they are centers of growth. And but cities also account for about almost 82% of the CO2 emission. And therefore, when urbanization took place across the Western world, land, gas, and water were all cheaply available. So America had the luxury of living, creating, the people could live in New Jersey, travel to New York, guzzle gas, build limousines. They created cities like Atlanta where actually 99% of the people travel by car. So they created some of the most unsustainable models of development, and the car companies actually bought over the railway companies and destroyed them. So the process of urbanization across the world, while it created wealth, actually was one of the most unsustainable processes of growth. Now the process of urbanization has ended across America, it's ended across Europe, it's nearing its completion in China, but in India it's just begun. But the next wave of this growth, to my mind, will move away from urbanization to oceans. And oceans will be critical because they cover about 3/4 of the Earth's surface. They contain about 97% of the Earth's water. 97% of the Earth's water, whereas on land you're facing huge challenges of water. They represent almost 99% of the living area on the planet. And oceans are not an inexhaustible resource, an infinite sink. And there are huge evidences of degradation of oceans' health. There's been overexploitation of fish in parts of the world. 30% of the world's fish stocks are overexploited. There's been dumping of untreated pollutants from land into the sea. 13,000 pieces of plastic litter per square kilometer of sea. There have been shipborne marine pollution, including oil spills. We've had this huge incident in Chennai recently. There's been contamination of natural marine habitat. And all this impact of ocean degradation has led to an increase in ocean acidification. There's been a 26% rise in ocean acidification since the Industrial Revolution. There have been ocean warming and ocean deoxygenation, which has impacted aquatic life. Now, the ocean's ability to serve as carbon and heat sink has been reduced very sharply, and it has been accomplished. It has been accompanied by loss of marine biodiversity, and there have been huge number of studies to demonstrate this. When the concept of blue economy was actually first articulated by Gunter Pauli in 2004, to my mind, was an attempt to say that you can have growth and development, but you need to do it in a sustainable manner. And there has to be a sustainable approach to utilize marine resources, and we should not make the same mistakes which the Western world has already made in the process of urbanization. And therefore, it advocated innovative business models to bring products and services into the market and encouraged competitiveness using untapped local potential. And the key to the entire approach was that you should look at innovation and you should look at job creation. And you should do it in an extremely sustainable manner. It's not that you don't tap resources. There are huge resources available, oil and gas, water. All this is necessary to tap. But whatever you do it in a manner where you look at the carrying capacity of the oceans. And this was also a point of time when the world was moving away from what was traditionally known in the world of travel and tourism as the sun, sand and sea approach, the triple S. And the world was also moving towards a more experiential form of tourism. In the World Tourism Organization in the 1980s did a survey by one of the most leading tourism experts of the world, a German. His name was Gauntlet, and he had done an entire survey. And then he said in the 80s everybody wanted to go to a destination which had sun, sand and sea. And in 2010, World Tourism Organization did a similar survey with the same class of people. And they said that the world of tourism had moved away to more experiential form. And people wanted to actually go and experience a destination as it exists, get a feel of its culture, get a feel of the people, get a feel of its unique values and give back to the destination something. Whatever you get from that destination, you want to give back to it. And that was particularly true for the rich and famous tourists who were willing to spend a high dollar. And therefore the world was moving away from triple S to experiential tourism. And therefore, this period of when the innovation, when the concept of blue economy came in, also converged with the world of experiential tourism. And therefore, it also was around the same time when we had the Agenda 21 of the Earth Summit and around the Rio Summit in 2012. So the focus was all on sustainability. Focus was all on carrying capacity. And therefore the core elements of the blue economy definition was that the economic activity is in balance with long-term capacity of ocean ecosystems must be looked at. And that the desired outcome of improved human well-being and social equity while reducing environmental risk. In this NMF journal, Maritime Affairs, I came across a wonderful article by S. Smith Godfrey, which defines blue economy as a sustainable industrialization of oceans to the benefit of all. If you look at the OECD's ocean economy database, they value the ocean's economy output in 2010 at $1.5 trillion, or approximately about 2.5% of the world's gross value added. 2.5% of the world's gross value added. Offshore oil and gas accounts for 1/3 of the total value added of the ocean-based industries, followed by maritime and coastal tourism, maritime equipment and ports, all this. And their OECD's analysis is that the direct full-time employment in the ocean economy accounted to almost about 32 million jobs, and that's a figure of 2010. And the largest employers were industrial capture fisheries with over 1/3 of the total, and maritime and coastal tourism with almost 1/4. There are several states of India which are highly dependent on this. I've worked in Kerala, and I've worked in the fisheries sector, I've worked in the tourism sector. Let me tell you that this sector is very critical from the viewpoint of livelihood as well. And therefore, to my mind, the Indian Ocean region presents tremendous opportunities, not merely in terms of sustainable development, but in terms of trade potential. The trade from this region has increased by over 4 times from $302 billion in 2003 to almost about 1.2 trillion from the Indian Ocean region itself to 1.2 trillion in 2012. And this is all amongst the member countries in the Indian Ocean Rim Association. The fish production itself has increased radically. A huge jump has taken place, almost about close to 350 odd % jump has taken place in fish production itself. Now, what does the OECD say? It says that by 2030, the ocean economy could more than double its contribution to the global value added, reaching over 3 trillion. And this is particularly strong growth is expected in marine aquaculture, offshore energy, fish processing, shipbuilding and repair. And they are anticipating that huge amount of employment will also take place, and the fastest growth in jobs is expected to occur in offshore, wind energy, marine aquaculture, fish processing and port activities. When you look at the OECD's report and you try and look at it in the context of India's ambition to grow and India's ambition to grow with job creation, I think we must look at the possibility of India's huge strength of 7,500 kilometer of coastline, 2 million square kilometer of exclusive economic zone, as Admiral Dhawan said, more than 1382 islands which have been totally mapped and which for the first time Government of India has asked NITI Ayog to go in for a very sustainable, holistic, integrated development of these islands. And the first 10 islands have been put out for bidding. A huge, large network of rivers, a strategic location in Indian Ocean region, strategic location where 80% of the world's seaborne trade in oil is in close proximity to India. 2/3 of the global energy trade takes place from here, and half of the world's containerized cargo trade is in Indian Ocean, and 1/3 of global bulk cargo. All this is all huge amount of India's strength. And therefore, to my mind, there's a massive possibility of growth in a sustainable manner, and there's a huge possibility to transform. And how do we do this? I think first is that in India's case, the merchandise trade contributes only 42% of India's GDP. Whereas if you look at Europe, 70% is the case in EU. And we need to radically improve the turnaround time in our ports and bring in greater level of efficiency in our ports, and particularly the management of our public sector ports. Because you have private sector ports in Mudra, and we recently analyzed the performance of Krishnapatnam port on the eastern coast. Both these ports work to much higher levels of efficiency, and therefore the turnaround time at our public sector ports, either we need to privatize them or bring in greater levels of efficiency. And I have reached a conclusion where efficiency of our ports is very critical to improve our trade, merchandise trade. And this is necessary because no country in the world post-World War II has actually grown without being a very major player in trade. I mean, if you look at Japan, it grew on the back of trade. It penetrated American markets. When you look at Korea, it grew on the back of trade. Recent times, China's growth has all been on the back of trade. But all this has grown on the back of huge total factor productivity improvement. And without efficient ports, it's very difficult for countries to grow. You know, when Japan was growing, the total factor productivity improvement in its GDP growth was almost 32%. But when Korea overtook it for that next decade of its growth, total factor productivity in Korea was amounting to almost 41% of its contribution to its GDP growth. But when China later took over from Korea and grew for rapid periods or growths of 10%, 11%, total factor productivity was accounting for almost 71% its contribution to GDP. And this was happening because the entire strategy was that you use your ports to penetrate global markets. So everything was directly linked to coastal areas. You bring inputs, do value addition, produce for the markets, and exports. So you become, using your ports, you become an integral part of the global supply chain. We are living in a globalized world. If you're not an integral part of the global supply chain, it's impossible to penetrate. And therefore, irrespective of the talk of protectionism, of Trump talking about protectionism in spite of Brexit, my belief is that it will be impossible for countries to grow and penetrate without hugely capturing global trade markets. And therefore, India must remain a very strong advocate of globalization, of penetrating trade markets. And without trade, it will be very difficult for India to grow despite a vast domestic market. The domestic market can be used as a springboard for exports. But exports per se are critical for job creation. Because the big bucks are all out there. What you get in the domestic market, 10x of that in unit value realization you get in exports. And for that to happen, your coastal belts and your ports and your infrastructure and your connectivity with the ports has to be very, very, very efficient. And therefore, my belief is that we need to push that efficiency. The shipbuilding industry, you look at Japan, which grew, and later Korea, all of them was on the back of shipbuilding industry to a great extent. But we ranked 17th in the world, and I think we need to bring in great reforms we need some huge amount of reforms in that sector. Our deep sea fishing, as you know, is almost non-existent. We do a little bit of shrimp exploitation from Vizag and so on through trawlers, but we don't go beyond our waters, so we don't do deep sea fishing at all. And deep sea mining and harnessing ocean thermal energy is critical. There's need for interconnected transshipment, connecting ports and inland waterways, which will give us a huge strength in terms of linking our waterways with our ports. So interconnected transshipment will radically reduce the cost of transporting cargoes. So these are areas where India must focus on and transform. And all these initiatives have to converge in the context of our blue economy and in the context of sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Goal 14 actually talks about the blue economy. It talks about conserving and sustainably using the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. And actually in this area, we've taken several initiatives. We've hosted the first Blue Economy first Blue Economy Dialogue in Goa in 2015, the Blue Economy Declaration in Indian Ocean Rim Association. Ministerial conference was held in Mauritius. Several initiatives have been done, and I'm glad that we've given it a big push to. We've tried to give a huge push to commercial shipbuilding, etc. But there is a need to integrate the entire concept of blue economy in a governing policy itself. This has to converge, this has to integrate and become a very integral part of our growth strategy, become a very integral part of our policy framework. And for the first time in the vision document that we are doing, we are also preparing framework for the defense and internal security, which will get integrated with the 15-year vision document being prepared by the NITI. And the blue economy aspect will form a very critical and a very major component of it. The India's neighborhood first policy assumes primary importance in the light of blue economy. We've had this India-Seychelles Pact for Cooperation on Blue Economy to promote sustainable ocean development in the Indian Ocean Rim. We have an agreement with Dhaka for coastal shipping and development, blue economy in the Bay of Bengal. But I think the critical issue is that we've now focused very strongly in terms of the perspective plan of Sagarmala project. And in the Sagarmala project, we are looking at, we were hitherto doing isolated development of ports. None of them were connected. And quite often, we were doing port development at very close proximity, and actually we were cannibalizing our ports. So if you do too many port development in very close proximity, whereas if you look at the strategy across the world, wherever development has taken place, You look at one port, develop them to world-class standard, don't allow any other port to come up in close proximity, make it one of the most efficient ports in the world, and that's how actually if you go and see the size and scale of what has been done in Shanghai and all, it's really marvelous to see what China has achieved in terms of the port development. And therefore, in terms of Sagamala strategy, we are looking at port development, and especially the coastal employment zones, some coastal, few coastal economic zones, one on the west coast, one on the east coast. And our belief is that if India's growth strategy has to be coupled with employment, coastal employment zone have to play a major role. And you need to provide benefit in terms of the kind of employment which companies which come in will generate over a period of time. So in the Sagamala region, we plan to triple the cargo capacity of the major and both the major and the non-major ports. Our intention is to boost India's export by 2025 and create 40 lakh direct jobs and indirect employment for 60 lakh people. Our objective is to create good port infrastructure enhancement, including modernization and setting up of at least 2 new ports, and efficient evacuation to and from hinterland so that goods, and it's important to understand why this is critical, because goods produced in the northern part of India actually take about almost 12 to 13 days to reach the ports in the western coast of India. And therefore the logistic costs in India are very high. Similar is the case with goods produced in the eastern part of India to come to the northern part of India take about 13 to 14 days. One of the biggest transformation that will take place will be the dedicated freight corridor, which in 2018 end will connect the northern part of India from Dadri in Noida to the JNPT port, where you will have a container train which will only move containers, no passengers, only containers, move at high speeds and put goods straight into the ports in the western coast, JNPT, Mudra, Pipavav. And therefore goods, instead of taking 14 days, will reach within 14 hours. That will be the paradigm shift. So take containers, put them straight into the ports. And this will happen by 2018 ends. And similar will be the case of the Eastern Freight Corridor, which will connect Calcutta to Amritsar and pass through some of the richest agricultural belts of Orissa, Bihar, UP. And therefore these freight corridors will actually ensure that your goods are able to reach from the northern part into Calcutta, goods produced in the northern part to be able to reach the ports in the western coast, all the major ports of JNPT, Mudra and Pipavav within 14 hours. And to my mind, what this has opened up is the possibility. These are completely new lines where construction is almost 60% through. And this has opened up the possibility of new city development on either side. So on the northern, in the dedicated freight corridor between Delhi and Mumbai, 5 new cities are presently under development in Dholera, in Nasik, close to Aurangabad, and in close to Ujjain in Madhya Pradesh, etc. So completely new development which will radically transform India. So there's a huge, to my mind, 2018, 2019 will be really the turning point of bringing in greater logistical efficiency. So instead of having container freight stations sprung up all over, which then allow you to move goods by lorries, and lorries take a long time, you will have movement, big movement, just on container trains. And you will have large multimodal logistic hubs at the ports. So that will be a radical transformation. So government is fully committed to Sagamala. It has provided a huge budget allocation, and we are moving towards its speedy implementation through these coastal economic zones. We are trying to ensure that evacuation is better linked. So this is the broad perspective. My perspective is that the future of growth will come from oceans. My view is that the blue economy is a very critical component of it. My view is that if India wants to create growth on a long-term basis of 9 to 10% with job creation, the blue economy will play a very major and critical role. But the challenge for all of us is not to degrade it, not to follow the story of what the Western world has already done to the process of urbanization, but learn from all the mistakes and ensure that we do it in an integrated, holistic, and sustainable manner. And this would require a huge amount of education. This would require a huge amount of extension. This would require a huge amount of mass communication, but it will require strong laws, and it will require huge penal provisions to ensure that we don't do to the oceans what we've already done to the land. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.